Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We appreciate you joining us today. If you're watching this recording from the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition website, thank you for visiting the site and for clicking play. I'm thrilled to invite everyone to Keeping It Brief. Organized by the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition, this is a midweek, midday gathering on Zoom. It's just a monthly opportunity to get a quick update on some of the key issues that we are following that you may be interested in, or that some of our partners, some of the work of the partners are engaged in. I'm your host today, Ifia Duba, and I provide executive services to the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition. A quick word before we get started in our conversation about technology. When you joined, your microphones were muted and your camera turned off automatically. And so while you can see and hear us, cannot see and hear you. So grab a lunch, grab a snack, something to drink, sit back, relax, be your most comfortable, but still attentive self, and enjoy the conversation today. If you have a question or comment, you can always type it into the chat function along the bottom of your screen, and I'll do my best to keep my eye on that and make sure that we're addressing any questions that come up. For those of you who may be new to the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition, we were organized in 2008, designated as a nonprofit in 2015, and are a nonpartisan coalition of individuals and organizations that really envision a socially just community and society rooted in the common good for every individual to be able to achieve their full potential. There's a lot of growing complex intersectionality around that. And so we're doing a lot of education, not only of others, but of ourselves to kind of create systemic change. This afternoon's conversation is being recorded, so give us a day or two and we'll get it up on our website. And if you receive our e-newsletters, you can always check there for links back to past events. And you'll see not only this conversation, but the previous conversations we've had this year and the previous year. I also encourage you to click around on the website when you're there to see some blog posts, some opinion pieces, and just get a sense of some of the work that we've been doing. This program, like other work that we do, is offered at no cost. If you appreciate the learnings and you think it's worthy of a contribution, we invite you to go onto our website. You can make a safe and secure donation there, or you can mail us a check, and our mailing address is also on our website. I am going to stop with all the organizational talk right there and get to the business of today. I'm very excited to have two guests with us this afternoon. We are joined by Barbara Simmons and Gayle Evans. They're joining me today to talk about the importance of really understanding systemic racism and its impact on us, and what it takes to really work towards racial justice in a divided world. Barbara and Gayle will also be facilitating an experiential workshop later this month on Friday, April 21st, from 9:30 to 5:30 p.m. at Salem United Church of Christ in Doylestown. You can register for that if you haven't already through the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition website. There's still some space available. Typically, I've told Barbara and Gayle that typically I read people's bios at this point and just felt like it seemed kind of silly to do that. These are two really great women that I'm excited to have here today. And I think what I'd love to have you kick off doing, and you guys can decide amongst yourself who goes first, is share a little bit about who you are, the journey that got you into doing this work in the first place, and how the two of you have come to be doing this work together.
Gayle, why don't you start?
I was going to ask you, Barbara, since you were unmuted at first, but certainly I will start. And my apologies to begin with. If you see my computer screen going a little wonky, I will take myself off camera, wait a minute or so, and then place myself back on. My connection's been a bit unstable. But thank you so much for inviting me here today. I very much appreciate it. And for those of you who have attended, I started this work, probably, it's interesting when I think about it, from birth. And so as a child, I grew up in Newtown Borough. And so it was very unusual to even have people of color living in that community. And just, you can almost imagine some of the experiences that myself and family members have had. We are 7 generations in the Newtown community as a family of color. But it wasn't until I had my daughters. I have 6 daughters, and just the experiences that they have gone through in the school system and in the community largely brought me into this arena. And then I worked at the community college for 20 years, working with students who were academically underprepared and financially disadvantaged, the majority of which were students of color. And so that's what really brought me into the foray of understanding the holistic needs of people of color, particularly those who did not live in the Newtown community, but were coming to the community college from different parts of the county. So that's where I began focusing on the needs of women who were primarily single mothers and the needs of those people of color who needed more support, more assistance, and to understand the challenges that they were experiencing. And, just really reflecting on the support that they needed. And so that's when I began to do the work of being an advocate, activism work, and working in the community to uplift those marginalized communities. And so it's continued on. And I want to say it's been about 30 years or so that Barbara and I have known each other. We began doing work a very long time ago on this issue. I am so happy that we are still good friends, still doing this work. I am unhappy that we still have to do this work. So I'm going to pass this over to Barbara now. I think that's enough about me right now. 6 daughters would have done it. That would have told you in this work, right?
The 7 generations was very interesting to hear as well. So,
Yes. Thank
Barbara,
you.
please.
Yeah, it's really good to be a part of all of this. I started this work probably close to 40 years ago when I was volunteering at the Peace Center. We were working with groups such as Interracial Harmony and the NAACP, and I have a Black son, and so I just feel like I have been wanting to understand how we can figure out getting along better with one another, became a mediator, a conflict resolution practitioner. And, it's not enough to be able to get through a conflict without hurting one another. I recognize that there were systemic reasons why there was conflict. And once you start to go down that path of researching and understanding, I probably took hundreds of hours worth of training, but some of that training was in South Africa, and then traveling to Rwanda, and being with people who are battling the systemic racism, whether it's this country or another country. So I just I feel very privileged to be able to reach people that look like me, that are white, to be able to say, this is how I'm choosing to use my privilege to help others understand what it means to recognize discrimination, witness discrimination, and how do we put ourselves into the shoes of other people to understand what they're experiencing. Because of my son, I recognize subtle racism that I hadn't recognized before. And so I guess, my work with the Peace Center is really a big part of that. I've also been an adjunct professor at Arcadia University's International Peace and Conflict Resolution Program, which also has us traveling to places around the world. And since I retired from the Peace Center, I continue to do peace and justice work. So I've been working with Walking While Black Love is the Answer. And feeling the need to have police officers understand what racism looks like and how the role they play in that. And so, and Gayle and I have been doing this work together for a long time, and that has really also been a part of my understanding and journey and wanting to be an ally for not just Gayle, but our kids and our grandkids. And so my hope is that this workshop that's coming up will, give people just a taste of, I guess I'm calling it 101, understanding racial justice, because we all need to be taking that journey together.
So let's maybe start by, because you've referenced systemic racism. So let's start maybe at the pre-reading for the 101 course with, can you just explain systemic racism to all of us?
Do you want me to take that, Gayle? And then you?
Sure.
Okay. For the last 400 years since slavery, our systems were built by white men, and they were set into place, whether it's healthcare, whether it's housing, whether it's education, the criminal justice system. These are all institutions that were created by white people, and so we don't have a level playing field. We don't have people that really even understand what racism is. They think it was a long time ago. We got to move on. We got to get past that. But we do not have a system in place and throughout our society that has leveled the playing field. So, whether it was slavery followed by Jim Crow, people were not allowed to have wealth. They were not allowed to own property, pass on wealth. So, at what point do we level the playing field so that we can have racial equity and take apart those systems and rebuild them with diversity as we rebuild them.
And to piggyback, Barbara, what is really important about this is that there were laws, treaties put into place that created a system that gave unfair advantage to some individuals and deliberately disenfranchised other individuals. And so those systems, even if a law was overturned or a treaty was somehow walked back, still place people of color, particularly Black people, in a position where they could never catch up, that they were never going to be in an equitable place. And so those systems and structures still exist today, even if they're not on paper. Even if we were to take every individual that we consider to be a racist out of our nation, we would still live in a racist society. And that's because of the systems and that were built to dehumanize and to disenfranchise people of color.
I think that's a really great thing, because as people are listening and you want them to things for people to consider, and I think of even kind of often the defensiveness to this topic, understanding that idea of like, hey, we could remove anybody who we might identify as a racist, right? Leaving behind only the good people. And still there are still those institutions and those systems in place that somehow need to be undone and or restructured and addressed. So I think I think I can appreciate, simplicity and an ease to just understanding, hey, we got all the bad ones out. We kept just all you good folks. Still, there's this work that needs to be done. So I think the other thing that I often think about, and I know I've often heard, is that when you're talking about racism, people really feel like it's an issue that belongs to maybe Black people or, whoever it may be, whatever those that the groups or populations are. Like, why does everybody need to care? Why is this, and is this something that transcends age, race, class? There's a mix of people who may be listening to this conversation today, a mix of people who may show up at the workshop on the 21st, and hopefully a mix. Why should people care?
Good question. I I think we should care because what we've created is a, s- a system that's filled with trauma, and that trauma impacts everyone. And if we really understood the trauma that we've inflicted upon people of color, we'd be able to be at a place where we could start to have conversations about how to repair the damage. Um, and what I mean by that is that, we've created not just the systems that we talked about, but what is the impact that those systems that have had on people. And the criminal justice system, we could spend a whole day doing a workshop just on understanding the impact that has on all of society, or education, how the impact that has on all of our children. And I think that most of us here, um, care about human rights issues, care about um, women's equality. And so, and why do we care about those issues? It's all the same. And if we can look at racism, it can help us understand also anti-Semitism and homophobia and all the isms that we've created. So for me, it's about the trauma.
Mm. I agree with Barbara. We talk quite a bit about what trauma looks like in communities. And that is something that we will certainly address in the larger workshop of the impact of trauma, but how people live in that and walk in that on a daily basis if you're a person of color. But also recognizing the connections that we have as people, that it's impossible. This is a terrible thing to even talk about. We look at the pandemic and COVID-19, and we recognize that how we can contract a virus by being in the same space with someone. And so let's talk about racism in the same vein. How we can contract that virus of racism by being in the same space as others. How we can contract trauma by being in the same space as others. And so we cannot possibly believe that we can have our neighbors living under the sort of the penalty of just being born a different color and the impact that that has on them, and it not impact other communities. We know that America is changing. We see the face. We know that we are living in a nation where the number of people who are non-white is growing. And so if we don't recognize that and recognize the needs of those communities, the importance of those individuals to operate in a healthy society, then we're in big trouble. And so it is important, not for just those who may look like me, but those who look like Barbara, that we're recognizing that all of those factors that play into what racism looks like are going to affect me just as much, or should I flip that around, affect Barbara nearly as much as it affects me.
I have to say, Gail, you're coming up with these gems for me in terms of like, all the things that I'm going to kind of tuck away to use in a response to somebody at some point when they ask me some questions, because I do appreciate this image of like we could catch this virus just from sitting in the same space as someone. And I can think of all the times where people, I've been in conversation with folks who either feel like it's not their issue to take up, or they're not really engaging if they're just kind of like, in a bystander position. Oh, I know them, but I'm not like them, or I know them, but I don't say the same things. And really just again, what it means to, no matter who you are, no matter, what color you may be, what it means to sit in a space and experience and hear and feel the impacts of racism. And to and really this idea that it's, it doesn't, you can't just avoid it. It may, right, much like COVID, maybe the impacts on you vary or show up differently, or symptoms show up differently, but the impacts are still going to be there.
Right.
I wanted to share a story, and this happened several years ago, but it was at a local elementary school, and we were doing a program with second graders, and I don't remember what the activity was. Maybe Gayle would remember it as I describe it, but it might have been step into the circle if, and this one little boy, a little boy of color, said, this is what has happened to me. And his white classmates had not heard this before. So in that moment, I was thinking, like, I wonder what's going to happen here with these little ones as they discover this about one another, right? Because otherwise all they were doing was just, being little kids with one another, not recognizing how this little boy was being impacted because he was being bussed in from another area into this, like, mostly
Yeah.
white community. And what happened in that moment was just how many people stepped forward to be, like, they didn't know what the word ally meant, but they stepped forward to be an ally to this little boy. And it just transformed the classroom.
Yeah.
And so when we don't have those conversations at a very young age, we don't understand the impact. We then can't develop any kind of sense of how can we help. And the trauma just grows. The trauma becomes cumulative, So when you ask about people being impacted, I think children feel the impact in preschool, with racism coming into that, and Harvard studies have shown that racism shows up in preschool. So I think the earlier we have these kinds of opportunities to understand racism, the better.
Yeah. I want to quick jump over to the chat because we do have a couple of comments in the chat. First of all, greetings back to Melissa, who put a little message in here to everybody. So hello back. Jackie Rogers put a comment in here. Heather McGee in The Sum of Us does a wonderful job of showing why the harm that's inflicted on one group negatively impacts all groups. I think kind of further affirming what we've talked about so far today. And then we have a question from Marcia. How do either of you handle the nevers? Those who think it's not their issue or problem, those who think others should work on it, those who don't believe there is a problem.
Yeah, we're up against that a lot.
Surely you've solved that by now.
Right. Gayle and I were in the middle of a workshop when somebody just stood up and said, we don't need to stay for this. This is not our issue. This is not my issue. And I have to say I was caught blindsided by that. And I don't feel like I had a good response, but the thing that worries me is this rise in white nationalism and white supremacy. And the fact that they're reaching out to young people. So that makes me worry that there's going to be, a younger version of, this isn't my issue, or I don't have to worry about that. I don't know. I still don't feel like I've got the best response to it, other than this does impact all of us. If they're in a place where they're not going to believe it, then I can't necessarily convince them. I find that they move away from me.
I agree with Barbara that there are many, many people who just are not ready for the conversation and are not ready to face their own biases, maybe some underlying racist beliefs. And you're always very careful in how you are constructing a challenge to whatever they're saying. One, we know that humiliation, embarrassing people, shaming people does not work. So I try to use my own personal experiences when I am having conversations with those folks who push back with the never. What I tend to find more often now is people who are just completely oblivious to acts of bias and racism. And I'm always amazed at how many people do not see what I believe is right in front of them. And so I see that more than I do people who say to me, well, I know I'm not racist. I couldn't possibly be, or I could not be anti this. I couldn't possibly be. And so I just point out to them, and this is where the education piece comes in, self-educating yourself, to know, to point out some factual things to individuals. It is a fact that at one point people were enslaved. It is a fact that more Black and brown people are incarcerated at higher rates. It is a fact. And so, and then I encourage them to look it up for themselves. There's never a 5-minute fix for getting people to see that racism exists, and that, and I'm walking away from that conversation knowing that, okay, now she knows, now he knows that racism is here. It's here in Bucks County, it's here in Pennsylvania, it's here in the nation. And, I've changed a mind today. I never have that mindset. It's just about planting a seed and hoping that they take it with them and do some searching on their own.
Yeah. I will say Barbara, as you brought up the trauma of it, I had the opportunity to be in a conversation at a conference just maybe 2 weeks ago or so, that was talking about Black curiosity and innovation. But the woman who was running the session started by asking people the impacts of slavery on Black people. And, nice full list going up on the sheets at the front of the room. And then asked about the impacts of slavery on white people. And commented later that it was the first time she had been in a room where people actually came up with this long list of impacts on white people, which was heartening. And I was, thought it was really fabulous how many people could really see, like, here's how this has cost others. But I think to that trauma point, there is this piece of what it takes to, what you have to kind of, the empathy in yourself that you have to kill in order to be able to inflict such pain and such harm and such damage on another person, let alone a group of people. And then what it means to kind of bake that into systems, and whether we know it or not, right? Because the whole idea is that there's so much of this bias that we're not aware of, and we're trying to raise our own awareness. But that kind of killing of empathy towards the other is there all along. And it was just this, in this very short period of time, kind of this reminder of this trauma. It maybe looks different across different people, but there is this level of trauma that everyone has experienced, and really kind of a really great loss, not only to Black people, but to others, because something had to be killed in them in order to really be able to do what was done.
Well, we forget we're all connected to each other. We can't see that thread that we're all connected to each other, but we are. And kids that witness racism or witness violence are very much impacted. That has been studied.
Yeah.
It's a secondary trauma. So at the very least, we have to recognize, and if we want to be selfish about it, that, okay, if we don't want to get traumatized, we better fix this trauma for everybody else. But I spent probably up to a year talking with a principal of a local school district who just had problems with Black Lives Matter, the whole idea of Black Lives Matter. And so he had attended our Martin Luther King Peace and Justice Summit and wanted to say, well, here's why I disagreed with the premise. And so we scheduled every Friday, we would spend an hour talking about racism on the phone. This was during COVID. And at the end of that almost year, what I found was that he just kept diverting to a different, yeah, but what about this, and what about this? And I would have to keep, trying to come up with, why the point he was making, wasn't a good analogy, or maybe it was inappropriate, or he hadn't thought it through, whatever it was. I finally had to stop the conversation because he wasn't moving on anything. And I thought, I've given this a lot of time, and now I'm done.
Yeah.
So, you give it your best, but you're not going to be able to
Can't
move
move everybody.
people who don't want to be moved. As Gayle said, there are just some people that aren't ready.
So we have another question in the chat, or maybe two, because I see Q2 halfway through. So we know there's a problem in Central Bucks School District and a few others in the county. Have there been some successes Bucks County school districts, maybe successful racism workshops with Bucks County school districts? And I think you've probably had any number of workshops together with schools in the Bucks County area that you would consider successful. I mean, it's maybe not wiped out the issue, but.
Gosh, when I think back to one of the first school districts that we were doing this work in was in Bensalem. And that was at least 25 years ago or more. And school districts seem to want to be able to, understand this issue. And I felt like, and maybe Gayle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like we were making progress.
Mhm.
But as soon as you have parents that get upset,
Yeah.
that's when it seems all you have to do is have one or two or three parents that get upset, and they can shut down any further work being done in a school district. And so, like, I felt Penridge School District was making a difference with hiring a DEI director.
Yeah.
That ended quickly. Bensalem put their DEI director on hold, after parents started to complain. So I think the sad thing for me is that this issue has been the most important issue for me, to try and create move that needle, create some shift. And so when you watch some progress being made, and then, oftentimes you'll take a step forward and two steps back. But I feel like in the last couple of years, we have taken many steps back. And so, but I retired a couple of years ago. Gayle, your answer might be different at this point.
No, I'm in complete agreement with you, Barbara. And I think if we were to just look at the makeup of many of the school boards in Bucks County, there's a direct correlation between bringing in individuals or organizations to work on the issues of racism in education, on what that looks like. We can see that moving the needle, we've certainly gone backwards. And I'll be perfectly honest and say, I don't know what specifically the answer to that is right now, other than approaching it from a community approach, and not necessarily through the school system. And it's something that I would have to say that Barbara and any number of us that do this type of work, is concerning to us. We can be raising a generation of young people who are just unaware, completely unaware of, and have no understanding of, who each other are, because we've made a decision not to share that with them, not to share the truth about our nation and the truth about the dangers, how dangerous racism is, how dangerous it is to be anti this and anti that. And there's a lot of work to be done. And I would say that there's a lot of people who may not have children in school systems that can have a great impact as well on it. And so, that would be one of the things. I know we had a question near the end. So you getting involved in our school systems and in board meetings and things like that are very, very important to the trajectory of where we're going next.
Well, and I think, right, what we're seeing in school districts, Bucks County, but across the country, is it is a good reminder of, that you're talking about racism being baked into systems. And while people may want to challenge the idea of systemic racism, the difficulty of trying to even address any of these issues or talk about these topics in a school system is a reminder of systemic racism. Um, so the second part of the question in the chat gets a little bit to, what people can expect on April 21st. And as I'm watching the time and watching the chat, I want to make sure that we give you the opportunity to highlight a little bit about what people can expect when they come to the workshop on the 21st. What are some of your intentions and what are you hoping to have as an outcome with this group of people that come together?
Barbara?
Well, Gayle and I spent the day together the other day planning out the workshop. I would say participants will find a very safe place to start that process of gaining some understanding of each other's biases. How do we keep growing and learning and building bridges and being the best ally we can be? And so, it'll be more experiential because to me, doing a lecture is reaching your head, your brain, but not your heart. So that's why we try to make things as experiential as possible. There'll be discussions as well. I mean, we want to hear everyone's about everyone's experience, thoughts, etc. But we're packing a lot into one day. I've devoted my life to just constantly growing. And even when I retired from the Peace Center, I took a 9-month course with Resma Menakem, my grandmother's hands, author of My Grandmother's Hands, because I wanted to still continue to keep learning and growing. And that is what it takes. And so this workshop will create that safe space in order for us to take a deeper dive into racism, personal racism and community racism, and how we can best address it.
Absolutely. And in addition, we'll certainly be touching upon the historical impact of racism and going back to, which I think it's very important, and sometimes we underestimate the value of history and some of those laws and those treaties that created the systems that we have today, where the systemic racism is coming from. We'll also touch upon Black resistance and intersectionality, the importance of those, especially as it pertains to being women and being a Black Indigenous person of color as well. And then, of course, racial bias. We all have biases. We know that racial bias plays a large part in how Black and brown people are the recipients of microaggressions and assumptions and stereotypes. And so we'll take, we'll delve into those areas. But as Barbara said, we're really looking at 101. This is a lifetime journey. And hopefully what it will do is lead people to want to know more, lead people to want to learn more. I'm always searching for understanding. And so we know that we all have knowledge of something. We all know, you pour milk over cereal, right? but we may not have an understanding of why, what does milk do to cereal to make it taste better? So what is the understanding of that? And so we have to search for that understanding. And once we gain that, then we now know, okay, I got it. That light bulb goes off and says, I have to be doing more. And so even those of us that are doing this work know that there's more that we have to do if we are expecting that we're going to live in a society where truly the color of your skin does not matter, that we do not live in a colorblind world and a colorblind society, but we can live in a society where the color of your skin will not determine your outcomes. And so it's just the beginning of providing, where do I go to next? There are going to be different paths people are going to decide that they can take. And here I go. I was doing so well.
You were doing great there, Gayle.
I was doing so well.
So close.
Something touched off the universe there. I'm not quite sure what it was. But we want people to know that, not everybody is going to be on the same journey or be at the same place. And so what is your starting point going to be once you leave the workshop?
Thank you. So we do have just a couple minutes left, and I'm curious, for anybody who maybe is unable to attend the workshop, are there resources that you might point them to or recommend, one or two things that you would maybe recommend people do if they want to figure out where they are and continue on this journey?
I wanted to recommend some reading perhaps that people could do. There's a book that I'm currently reading, which is pretty amazing. It's called Hospicing Modernity, by Vanessa Machado de Olivier. And it's facing humanity's wrongs and the implication for social activism. My Grandmother's Hands is another one I would recommend. Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. The Warmth of Other Suns and Caste by Isabel Wilkinson is also wonderful. I also just finished reading Blind Spot, which I really enjoyed. Well, when I say enjoyed, I mean it's not necessarily enjoyed, but I got a lot out of it. And when you're reading something, you're taking it in at your own pace. So I think that is one way of starting that process.
And the other thing I would add on is I believe that reading is just, fundamental. We learn that, at a very young age to learning, but not just read books, but there are many news articles that you can read from, whether it's NPR, The Guardian, that consistently print stories about things that are happening to real people today. And we cannot turn it's very easy to want to live in happiness all the time and say, I don't want to read something or learn about something that's somehow going to change the way that I feel, how my heart feels, how my head feels about the society that we live in. And so I would just encourage you, if you, I don't care whether it's Googling it, whatever you do, to read news stories about what truly is happening across our nation, and not soaking that in. That's really important. Also understanding and diving deeper into what you are reading. Many of these books they're wonderful books, but you may find that you're going to need to then supplement that information that you're learning in those books with additional work. And so I always say, as a former educator, college educator, and I would tell my students this all the time, and I'm sure you do too as well, Barbara, that learning never stops. And so just because you close that book doesn't mean that you don't open up another one too. I don't care if it's 3 words that you didn't quite understand in the book, continue that. I believe in lifelong learning, and this is an area where we truly need to continue to do that.
Thank you so much, Gayle. And Barbara, unfortunately we're at time, and I think we could talk about this for a while. It is a good teaser for why people should register for the workshop on Friday, April 21st. Like I said, 9:30 a.m. at Salem United Church of Christ. You can register through the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition website. So please go on there if you haven't already and sign up. I want to say thank you, share some gratitude with the board of directors for the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition, who have volunteered their time and have been very supportive of programs like this, to all of our issue specialists and partners and experts, all the expertise that people bring into the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition space. Thank you for all of the hard work that you do. I want to give a shout out to Linda, who is our admin behind the scenes and is making this program happen, and she will get it up on the website. So thank you for that as well. And then most of all, thank you to Barbara and Gayle, not only for your time today, which is precious enough, but the time that you will be spending with everyone on the 21st to dive deeper into this. And I'm sure we'll all come out with an even longer reading list by the end of that day. But thank you so much for that. I again encourage everybody to sign up for the workshop. Thank you for making time to be part of the conversation here today. And thank you to Barbara and Gayle for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having us. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.